farmer buys a sick bull out of pity, unaware that the animal harbored a surprising secret. The sun was already beginning to dip when the auction came to a close. The auctioneer wiped the sweat from his brow, announcing with little enthusiasm, "Last lot, folks. Adult bull, no papers, in poor condition." A heavy silence filled the arena. The few remaining onlookers didn't budge. The animal stood at the back of the pen, its coat patchy, open wounds marking its body. The ribs were visible, jutting against the thin skin, and its eyes, those eyes, looked defeated. Not even fear was left in them, just a deep, sorrowful quiet, as if the bull had already accepted its fate. The auctioneer tried again, "Any bids?" But no one answered. A few chuckles came from the crowd, and one of the younger breeders whispered, "That one's not even good for meat." John was just passing through, accompanying a friend, but something about the sight of the bull stirred something inside him. A strange ache in his chest, a feeling like an old wound, one that you don't quite remember but you know it's there. He stood frozen, staring at the animal for several seconds. There was something in that scene that unsettled him, an emotion he couldn't explain. A memory that didn't come in full, only the raw sensation of despair. The auctioneer sighed, clearly wrapping things up. "It's going straight to disposal if no one buys it." 80, John said without thinking. Heads turned and the auctioneer paused, surprised. 80? Are you sure? 80, John repeated. "Sold." A muffled laugh echoed from the back of the arena. Someone muttered, "Bought the problem." John didn't respond. He shrugged it off and went to collect the paperwork. On the way back, the bull fell twice inside the truck. One of the young men remarked, "Boss, this one won't make it past the week." John gazed out the back window of the truck, watching the animal lying in the corner. Its breathing was shallow, labored, but its eyes never closed. "As long as there's life in those eyes, there's hope," John said quietly. When they arrived at the farm, he knew something had just begun. The corral was empty, eerily silent. John made sure to descend the truck himself, guiding the animal carefully. The bull staggered but remained on its feet. It didn't have a name yet. It didn't have anything, but it was still alive. John stood there for a few minutes beside the animal, then crouched down, gently wiping the foam from its mouth with a cloth. "You don't deserve to end like this," he whispered softly. He didn't know who this bull was or what it carried within, but he sensed that behind its miserable state, there was a story that time hadn't told yet. John isolated the bull in a small pen, far from the other animals. He placed fresh water in a clean barrel, prepared a mixture of feed, bran, and fresh grass. The bull barely moved, only breathing slowly, lying on its side with eyes half open. He called Riley, an old acquaintance who knew how to treat sick animals. Riley arrived late in the afternoon, his hat tilted and a box of veterinary tools in his hand. He examined the bull calmly, inspecting the wounds, pulling back its eyelid and listening to its breath. "This one's too weak, mange ticks infection. The only reason he's still standing is stubbornness in his veins. I wouldn't give him more than a few days," Riley said flatly. John didn't respond, standing motionless, still staring at the bull. Riley wiped his hands with a cloth, turned to John and spoke quietly. "You bought this bull because of him, didn't you?" John paused for a moment, then nodded slowly. "He reminded me of him." Riley sighed deeply, shaking his head, but said nothing more. He handed John the prescription for the medicine and left. John did what needed to be done. He took the prescribed medications and administered them with his own hands. He scrubbed the bull's back with lye soap and a coarse brush, applied ointment to the wounds. He did this for 3 straight days without fail. On the 4th day, when John arrived at the pen, he found the bull standing. It was shaky, but it was on its feet, slowly eating the grass John had spread out for it. John stopped at the gate, crossed his arms and watched the bull. The animal lifted its eyes as if recognizing him. For a moment, the two stared at each other in silence. That night, John brought more feed, this time with a bit of supplement. He gently stroked the bull's forehead, and for the first time, it didn't pull away. It was the first time it accepted his touch. "Braveheart," John whispered almost to himself, "strong as wood. You've earned this name." The recovery wasn't quick. On some mornings the bull seemed worse. But John was there every single day. He'd place a chair near the pen and sit in silence, just watching. Caring for him became part of his routine, like the day couldn't truly begin without first tending to him. The ranch hands began to talk. Some said it was a waste of time. Others thought it was nice but didn't say it aloud. Deep down, everyone wanted to see how the story would end. With time, Braveheart's coat began to change. Where there had once been patches of missing hair, there was now a healthy shine. His body, once gaunt and brittle, began to take shape. He moved with more confidence now, pacing back and forth, testing the fence as though he wanted more room. John had the gate opened and let him graze for longer periods, always watching closely. He was no longer just a sick animal, he was a survivor. And there was something in his eyes that none of the other bulls had, an unspoken knowledge, as if he understood something the others couldn't. Braveheart moved with purpose now. He wasn't the same defeated creature that had arrived, almost lifeless. His coat shimmered under the sun, thicker now, regaining its original color. His muscles began to show beneath the skin, revealing the strong, imposing frame that neglect had nearly erased. He walked around the pen, slow but steady. He paused to graze calmly, lifting his head with dignity. His eyes no longer carried that emptiness from before. Now they were sharp, alert, and alive. On that morning with a clear sky, Braveheart was no longer just an animal. He was something more, something that had fought, endured, and come back stronger. John was near the corral, cleaning the trough, when he heard the familiar sound of tires on the dirt road. A truck was approaching slowly, kicking up dust. It was Riley. He got out of the truck calmly, adjusted his hat, and leaned against the wire fence. He stood in silence for a few moments, watching Braveheart pace back and forth. "Well, I'll be damned, he's really alive," Riley said, almost in disbelief. "More than alive, he's looking good." John didn't answer. He just glanced briefly at Riley before returning to his task of cleaning the trough. Riley stepped closer to the fence, studying the bull carefully, the way Braveheart moved, how he planted his hooves firmly into the ground, the way he tossed his head, his steady breathing. Then Riley's eyes narrowed. "Come here, look at this," he called. John walked over to where Riley was standing and saw it. Pushing apart the fur on Braveheart's left side, there was a scar. It wasn't like any normal scar. It was round, symmetrical, partially hidden as though time had tried to conceal it, but it was still there, subtle, carrying a history that only those who knew how to read it could understand. "This isn't a fence scar or a fight wound," Riley said, his voice low and knowing. "It's a tattoo, an identification mark. This bull's got top-tier genetics." John furrowed his brow and knelt next to the bull, studying the mark more closely. Riley was right. The mark looked old, but some of the details were still visible. Letters, numbers, something purposefully etched into his skin. Riley took his phone out, snapped a photo, and started typing. "Do you have the purchase receipt?" John stood up, wiped his hands on his pants, and walked slowly to the porch. He grabbed an old, worn leather folder from a shelf, its edges frayed from age. He returned slowly and handed it to Riley. "It's all here. When I bought him, I registered him even with the state he was in. I wanted to make sure everything was right," John said. Riley opened the folder carefully, taking out the yellowed paper. He checked the lot number, the auction house's stamp, and the simple receipt. He read it all through, then looked up at John. "It's all in your name. Everything's in order." "He's yours," Riley confirmed. John nodded silently, a lump in his throat he couldn't quite place. Riley sent the image of the brand to a friend of his, someone who worked in animal genetics, a man accustomed to dealing with lineages, records, and rare breeds. Riley didn't say anything more that day. He gave John a quiet nod before leaving. 2 days later he returned. He got out of the truck, holding an envelope, his face heavy with something unspoken. He walked straight over to John, who was sitting on the porch, drinking coffee from a thick glass cup. "Here's the answer," Riley said, his voice flat. John stood slowly, took the envelope, and opened it. Inside were printed papers filled with technical details, names, codes, registration numbers, and genealogies. And in the middle of it all, the confirmation. This bull is no ordinary animal. He is purebred, a rare bloodline. Born at one of the largest breeding farms in the region, from a line of award-winning sires, the kind that belong in catalogs for elite selection. John kept reading, his eyes fixed on the paper. His hands began to shake, almost imperceptibly. Riley continued speaking, his voice low and steady. The farm closed down. There was a mess, debts, lawsuits. A bunch of animals disappeared. No one knows what happened to them. Some say they were sold for nothing, others that they were abandoned. This one, he fell into limbo. John folded the papers carefully, placing them back in the folder. Riley leaned against the porch, crossing his arms, his gaze following Braveheart as he grazed peacefully in the distance. "When you told me you bought him because of him, I prayed for that animal to get better. I truly did. I didn't want this scene to play out again," Riley said quietly. John gripped the edge of the folder, his eyes moistening, but he didn't look up at Riley. "Yeah, I did the same thing. Every single day. I still remember him, his smile. Riley lowered his head. Kyle was a good kid, he didn't deserve this. John took a slow breath, his voice low but steady. When I saw this bull there, abandoned, lying alone like that, it was as if I had seen him before. The doctors had given up. They said there was no hope, that I should accept it. But I didn't accept it. I believed. I fought. I stayed by his side until the end, and even then I lost. The silence hung heavily, but it was necessary. Riley didn't try to console him. He simply stood there. I couldn't let it happen again, John continued, his voice rough. The two men stood quietly for a few more minutes, watching Braveheart settle down in the shade of a tree. A light breeze blew, carrying the scent of warm earth. Time seemed to slow there, as if the land itself was holding its breath. John pressed the folder against his chest, took a deep breath and said, I don't know what this bull will become. But here he'll have respect, care and affection. What my son Kyle deserved. Before Riley could respond, John didn't wait for an answer. Riley nodded slowly, his eyes full. His voice failed him. The bull lifted his head, looked in their direction for a moment, then closed his eyes again, calm and secure, as if he knew at last he was in the right place. Weeks passed, and Braveheart transformed before the eyes of everyone. There was no sign left of the sickly, dying bull John had brought from the auction. Now he walked with a firm stance, chest wide, neck held high, an imposing figure. When he crossed the pasture, the other animals stepped aside. He was respected. He carried himself with presence on the farm. No one made jokes anymore. Even the ranch hands who had once laughed at the bull now spoke with pride. The boss saved a purebred animal, they'd say. No one's ever seen anything like this. The story started to spread, first among the neighbors, then to other breeders in the region. A bull, once unknown and found in a terminal state, revealed itself to be a purebred from one of the most prized bloodlines. And the most remarkable thing? He had fully recovered, with the vigor of a young breeder. Some people didn't believe it. Others insisted on seeing it with their own eyes. Joao kept the bull at home, refusing every offer that came his way. One offer came from an outside breeder, an important figure accompanied by a technician. They spoke in high numbers, assuring John that the bull would be well taken care of. John simply replied, Braveheart is not for sale. He has a story here, and so do I. The men persisted, trying to convince him. They mentioned prestige, genetics, and recognition. Joao thanked them politely, served them coffee, and escorted them to the gate. That afternoon, as John sat in the shade of the barn, Riley appeared once more, carrying folded newspapers under his arm, a quiet smile on his face. Look at this, he said, handing the pages to John. In the middle of the newspaper was a story, Bull rescued from abandonment reveals rare bloodline. It was a story that had touched breeders everywhere. There was a photo of Braveheart standing in the pasture with the wire fence in the background, an image taken weeks earlier by a visitor, unnoticed by John at the time. It's going viral, Riley said. Even people from other countries are commenting. John stared at the article, reading it in silence. He said nothing as he carefully folded the paper and put it away. Then, looking at Riley, he said, It's a nice story, but that's not why he's here. I know, Riley replied, but after everything, he deserves to be recognized. Braveheart grazed quietly, surrounded by silence and respect. Sometimes, John would find himself just watching him for long minutes, as if still unable to fully believe. The bull would approach, accepting his touch, even resting his head against John's shoulder. It was a silent connection, but one filled with deep meaning. In the following days, visitors became a constant presence. Families, students, veterinarians, the curious. Many came because of the article, others out of sheer curiosity. John always welcomed them with patience, showing them the bull and telling his story, but always with humility, never with vanity. What saved him was time, food, and a bit of faith, he would say, and a stubborn heart, both mine and his. One afternoon, with the sky overcast and a cool breeze cutting through the fields, Braveheart approached John slowly. John was resting against the trunk of a tree in no rush. The bull placed his head gently on his shoulder. John didn't move, he just closed his eyes and stayed there, accepting the calm, heavy gesture. It was like an embrace, one without words but filled with everything that needed to be said. In that moment, John knew he had done the right thing. Because sometimes saving a life isn't about lifting a body, it's about believing when no one else does, caring when no one else will, and fighting even without guarantees. And in the end, Braveheart wasn't just a bull. He was a memory, he was a healed pain, he was the answer life had given John after so much silence. Now think about it. How many times have we passed someone who was fallen, weak, broken, and thought they were no longer worth anything? How many stories were buried before they were ever told, simply because they didn't shine on the outside? Braveheart was ignored, discarded, sold like trash, but all it took was one chance. All it took was someone to look at him with the heart, not in a hurry. How many lives do you think could change if they were given just this one chance? If this story touched you in any way, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future stories, and share it with someone who needs to believe in new beginnings. And tell me in the comments from where in the world you are listening to this story. I'd love to know how far Braveheart's story is reaching.